Hello and welcome back to another one of these tier list ranking videos. Now, today we are doing David Tennant, so I'm not even going to preamble this. Tennant is a good doctor. He's not particularly one of my favourites, but he's certainly probably in the top half. I think he's very good. His era has got a lot of great stuff going on. I need to get into this or else this video is going to take me forever because I talk way too much. The Christmas Invasion. Okay, I would say. I think that's a fair assessment of the Christmas Invasion. I don't mind it. I think it's possibly RTD's strongest Christmas special, but I'm not a huge fan of RTD's Christmas specials, to be totally honest. As you'll have seen if you'd seen my Christmas specials video, there's a lot of interesting stuff in this. I don't particularly like Rose. I think it's the beginning of the end for my love for her character. I think Tennant's quite dark, only when he's on screen, and that's the biggest problem. This is arguably the first Doctor Light story that we have, and it's watching a British government deal with an alien invasion by themselves, and a lot of awful things happening. It's a weird Christmas special, but I like those elements. Those elements I just talked about. Tennant on the edge, Harriet Jones being the main character for a large part of the plot. What I dislike is not the Sycorax stuff, because the Sycorax stuff is great. What I dislike is the Santa robots and the killer Christmas tree and this campy weaponization of Christmas that was very prevalent in the first couple of RTD Christmas specials, and I'm not a fan of that particular element. I should also mention that Rose is going to become insufferable during series 2, because that's going to come up a lot, like a lot. New Earth, bad. I don't really feel like I need. This had the what's the right word? Possibility, chance. This is such a good concept. These humans being bred like lab rats and being infected with all these diseases and the moral implications of that. And this whole script is a cop-out on an amazing concept, because they just switch out what should be one of the darkest stories in an era for body-swapping shenanigans with Cassandra and fun. And yes, the cast are having fun and it's a bit of a laugh, but it shouldn't be. This whole idea is so dark. And the ending is a total cop-out. The idea that they can just mix all these medicines together and boom, that's it. And it cures them. How great would this be? Because in Christmas Invasion, they were clearly setting up a much darker Doctor than the one that we got in Series 2. And how good would it have been if Tennant had to, I don't know, kill these creatures, these humans, because there was no curing them, and it would be the right moral thing to do. But instead, they're all just cured in the most anticlimactic way possible, by touch, because they just mix all the medicines in the world together and they now cure every single disease. Has he cured all disease in the entirety of the world? There's no one else on that planet ever going to get ill now because they just mix all these medicines together. That's not how medicine works. And it's just such a cop-out on an amazing concept, and that's what's so frustrating about it. There's some nice stuff done with Cassandra with her final moments, and so I want to make her is very good as ever, but I'm not a fan of this one because it swaps out what should be a dark tone for a very light, silly, affable one, and the ending should be a dark, Doctor-defining moment, and it's just a complete and utter cop-out. Tooth and Claw. Tooth and Claw. Okay. Better than the Christmas Invasion. Again, this has got some Rose Tennant stuff that I'm not a fan of. I'll try and leave a link to that video. If not, check out my channel. I've done an entire video on Rose and why I don't like her. Yikes, is all I can say about that character. I think this is a pretty good runaround. It's a story that I wish Doctor Who would do more of now. Just villain attacking them, running around the house. It's the most RTD era thing ever. Corridor, scary monsters. It's fun, but it's nothing particularly special. And it's actually, thankfully, not a story I've got quite a lot to say about. Ted and Rose annoy me. Queen Victoria is very good. I love Pauline Collins in this role. I was actually watching The Faceless Ones last night, which has got her in it 50 years ago. So it's nice to see that they brought her back, having played a character in Classic Who. Yeah, it's okay, but it's nothing particularly special. The first great story of the Tennant era is School Reunion, which I'm putting in great. I think School Reunion is such a good story, and it's not just good because of fan service. And I disagree with anyone who says that it's a fan servicey story. Yes, it is, but it's a good story, a good plot, well-paced plot with great villains, and then you add a little bit of fan service on top of that. This is not the Five Doctors. This is not just a load of fan service to keep the audience entertained. This is a great plot with fan service on top of it. The only detracting thing is the Rose and Sarah Jane bickering, which is totally unnecessary and uncalled for. But everything else is brilliant. I love Anthony Head. I think the Krillitanes should 100% be brought back. It's Tennant's first truly great performance in this role. For me, Tennant only shows how good a doctor he is in series 2 when he's away from Rose. And that's when he's with Sarah Jane, when he's with Madame de Pompadour, and when he's with Ida Scott. And he's really good here. Mickey gets some great stuff to do in regards to the Tin Dog. I'm not the Tin Dog. We get to see K9. There is fun fan service, but it only enhances what is already there. I really love this one, and the music is so good. Honestly, Murray Gold is insane. I can't believe I didn't talk about Murray Gold at all in my 9th Doctor video, but this is the first episode score where I could just listen to the whole thing for 45 minutes, just the music. It's so good. But it's not as good in terms of the musical score as The Girl in the Fireplace, and it's nothing in the Tennant era is as good as The Girl in the Fireplace. Why am I clapping like a maniacal John Stinn? The Girl in the Fireplace is the greatest David Tennant story. It is perfect. Beautiful, poetic, romantic, ridiculously quotable, hilariously funny, magical, whimsical, perfect. The music is great. I think Sophia Myles gives one of the best guest appearances of any Doctor Who actor ever. Every single line she said is like the best lines that Shakespeare never wrote. It's, for me, New Who's City of Death in terms of I could quote you the entire script off the top of my head. The lines are so ridiculously memorable, and they are so witty and clever and beautifully poetic. Everything that Renette says is gorgeous. I love the pacing of the plot. I love the intricate details. I love Moffat's charm and wit. I love the music. This is the best Tennant story in series 2, which is a series that I'm very mixed on. But when it hits, it's immense. And this is probably behind Heaven Sent, my second favourite New Who story. Easily my top couple of Doctor Who stories ever. I think this is an absolutely perfect piece of television. I do not have one complaint, not even the usual Rose is annoying complaints, nothing. I have absolutely no complaints to level of this. So good. Rise of the Cybermen. Okay, above the Christmas Invasion, below Tooth and Claw, that seems fair enough. It's a slightly slow first part that builds on a not so interesting parallel world, and the Cybermen themselves have been spoiled by the fact that they're in the title, so why don't you show them for 45 minutes? But the promise of Cybermen just about keeps me hooked until the story can actually kick into gear in the second part. Not a cliffhanger I'm overly a fan of, and some stuff that I'm not a huge fan of, but actual backstory for Mickey, which is good. And the story really kicks into a fantastic gear in its second part, which I think is great. Really takes its time to get going, but the second part is a sort of metallic zombie apocalypse, and it's massive in scale. It's like a mid-season finale, and I just really enjoy the story. I think it's got a lot going for it. I think John Lumick is actually pretty decent. I know he gets slagged, but I think he's pretty decent. I think that the Cybermen work in this story. They should not have come back after Eye of Ghost Doomsday. That design is okay. I don't have a lot of love for it, but it's pretty decent design. I think the stuff done with Rose and with Mickey and with Pete is all good character stuff all around. I enjoy Jake. I enjoy the 10th Doctor, and I think Mickey's exit is very well handled. Age of Steel is a vastly superior two-parter, and it's why I'm glad that these tier lists are letting me deal with two-parters in two different episodes rather than as one whole story, because sometimes a first part and the second part are just as good or just as bad as one another, and that's going to happen. But other times one part is so clearly a standout. And Age of Steel is miles above Rise of the Cybermen. Very good plot. I'm a big fan. The Idiot's Lantern, I'm not a big fan. Terrible. Maureen Lipman is a great casting to play The Wire, but The Wire is hammy and camp as hell. Mr. Magpie is not interesting. The Doctor and Rose are the smarmiest ever. In the Omen 10 series of New Who, there is only 2 stories that cannot be at least salvaged somewhat by the Doctor and companions. Sometimes you have a terrible story, but the Doctor and companions are still enjoyable enough. The 2 exceptions are The Idiot's Lantern and Fear Her, where Rose and Tennant are obnoxious and smarmy and giggly and flirty, and it's really frustrating to watch, and I can't bear to watch this awful butchering of their domestic abuse messaging. Go to him, forgive him. No, he's a domestic abuser. Why are we doing this? And just, I don't understand what's going through their heads when they came up with this. I mean, it's got a couple of interesting ideas about, and I like the 50s setting, but that's kind of it. It's probably the first out and out awful story of New Who. The Impossible Planet. Oh, this is so good. This is so good. Is it above School Reunion? Yes, actually, I think I probably will. Such a great first part, well paced, very well defined guest cast, interesting ideas. The Ood are great, the base is great. Just the idea and the concept of a planet that is impossibly circling a black hole is such an interesting idea and concept that I think it's just it just totally works. But for me, this is a great first part, but the second part is when it becomes an absolute classic. Such a good second part. Honestly, every time I watch it, this is the Base Under Siege story. Base Under Siege from Satan himself. The Ood closing in. Character deaths with actual meaning. Seriously impactful character deaths because we care about this guest cast. They have been properly done. David Tennant is at possibly his best all series when he's with Ida Scott and when they're having that conversation as he's climbing down into that pit. I don't know why I did that. When he's climbing down into the pit, a lot of good stuff going on here. Easily one of my favorite stories of all time. The guy who plays Toby, such a good performance. And I should have mentioned in The Impossible Planet, possibly the creepiest moment ever is the moment when he's going, don't turn around. Don't, if you turn around, you will die. How can Doctor Who make stuff that simple so effective? And Gabriel Wolfe, who voiced Sutekh in The Pyramids of Mars, coming back to voice the Beast, perfect casting. His voice is so incredibly effective. Love and Monsters. Series 2 grinds to a complete halt for some reason. Terrible. And I don't really have too much to add. I used to think this one was really underrated. But now, the more times I watch it, I no longer think that this is some not an unforgotten gem. I never thought that. I used to think that it was a decent story ruined by a bad villain and a final 15 minutes that totally loses its focus. But actually, the whole thing is just dull. The idea for a Doctor cult is a genuinely interesting premise, but it sort of goes nowhere because it's just done a load of silly stuff and RTD or campy humour. I cannot believe they wasted Mark Warren in this role. British TV spurned one of its greatest talents playing Elton. He could come back to Doctor Who, but it's unlikely they'll ever cast him again because he is already known for this character. He's not a good substitute for the Doctor, in the other Doctor Light stories that I can think of on the top of my head. The other Doctor Light stories I can think of is Flatline, Girl Who Waited, Turn Left. Those three were stuck with a companion, or Blink, or stuck with Sally Sparrow. He is not a substitute for the Doctor. He's just not strong enough. Peter Kay's performance is hammy as hell, way over the top. At least it's better than Fear Her. Fear Her is the worst David Tennant story. Awful effects, awful concept, awful script. The Doctor and Rose are obnoxious, smarmy, and annoying. The domestic abuse messaging is totally butchered again, twice in one series. We tried to have the same message and screwed up twice. How's that even possible? Chloe Webber can't act. There's just so much bad. The idea of the Aisholas is not an awful one, but the amount of plot holes, even me, I'm not someone who sits and tries to think of the logistics of a Doctor Who episode, because there is no logistics, there is no sense to any of it. And planes are loud. And that's sort of the point. I don't have an issue with the fact that there is no sense to Doctor Who sometimes. But this time I'm like noticing all these things that maybe I would normally just be too immersed in an episode to really focus down on. Like, why, if she drew the Doctor and the TARDIS and they both disappeared, did the stadium not disappear when she drew the stadium? Why did she have to draw all those people in such detail when in the stadium she just drew like 100 stick people and they all vanished? And why did they decide to up the plot and have her draw the entire planet at the end? Why does her dead, domestically abusing dad come back as a drawing? Why did you make this piece of television? There. I know I'm sounding like I'm really negative on Series 2 right now, which, granted, I sort of am, but I don't know. I just don't have much love for a lot of Series 2, to be honest. Army of Ghosts is good. Possibly unpopular opinion, but this is definitely not one of my favourite finales. Actually, both Army of Ghosts and Doomsday can go in there. They both feel it's a very consistent two-parter. I don't feel like it has a major tone shift or a major quality shift halfway through like some other two-parters do, particularly finales. We'll get to that in Series 3. But I enjoy Army of Ghosts Doomsday, but I actually feel like the twist of the Cybermen and the Daleks really kind of takes away from what the story should be kicking into gear. Army of Ghosts is a slow but fun first part, and it feels like the story should kick into an amazing gear in the second part, but it kind of doesn't, because it introduces the Daleks with the Cybermen, which is fun, but all it means is the Daleks are now the big threat. The Cybermen are now no point in being there whatsoever, other than for the original Ghosts tie-in. They all get killed by the Daleks. They can't even scratch the Daleks' bodywork, and they have to team up with the Doctor. Not good stuff. The actual final moment on Bad Wolf Bay is great, and I say that as someone who really hates Rose. I think it's a great ending, and it should have ended there. That should have been her definitive exit. We did not need her to come back in Series 4. Why did she come back in Series 4? Why? I've talked about Series 2 for quite a while now. The Runaway Bride. Yikes. I put that in bad. Is that harsh? I feel like that's harsh. Put it above New Earth, probably, because I'm not a fan of that one. But, I mean, it's watchable fun. But when you actually think about it, I did not enjoy this one. Sarah Parrish is totally wasted. The Rachnos are a cool villain in concept, but I don't think the design actually works. Donna is at her most deliberately annoying. She's just much more Lauren Cooper, standard Catherine Tate character than the much more nuanced, well-written Donna that we've got. But when this story actually focuses and gets away from the turn of the flying of the Santas and the grenade baubles, we don't need that stuff, Russell. We don't. Honestly, I was more than happy to watch the Doctor commit a lovely Christmas genocide, because that scene of Tennant, when he's standing there and the flames are flowing up behind him, the Rachnos are screaming, is incredible. Bit weird for Christmas, but it's so good. And actually, the final 15 minutes always drags me in. And that's possibly the reason why it's not the worst Christmas special of them all. Because the actual plot does nothing for me. And we don't even have a wolf yet, so Donna's family don't really do anything for me either. But when that final 15 minutes really kicks the story into gear, it's great. And it really is at the end. Smith and Jones. Okay, we're on to Series 3 now. Great, but where to put it? Below School Reunion. I think Smith and Jones is the best series premiere of the RTD era. I think it's a great, fun, underrated story with Tennant at his best, Martha at her brightest, the Judoon doing some great stuff, the Plasma Boy is a great villain, fun, funny, totally bonkers. The most RTD script ever, because it's just corridor running, corridor running, corridor running. It always feels fun. It never waits up. The music is great, and the concepts are big and bold and brash and brilliant. And there's a lot to love in this story. I think it's an incredibly underrated one. For me, it's basically a soft reboot, because the show had begun and it was all about Rose. And this is the soft reboot where they're starting a new chapter. And it's where I really start to love David Tennant as the Doctor, because when he emerges from the shadow of Rose and the flirting's done, I think he becomes a really great Doctor. And he is great in this story. And I love how he tricks the plasmavore into, well, draining his blood, but his willingness to sacrifice himself as well to save those people is as far away from the vanity of End of Time as you can possibly get. Martha is just immediately established as a brilliant companion straight from the off. The Shakespeare Code. People probably want to hate the Shakespeare Code simply because it's written by Gareth Roberts. But I really like the Shakespeare Code. I'm going to put it above Doomsday because, yeah, I'm that guy. I think the Shakespeare Code's great fun. Witches, Harry Potter, nice little Shakespeare. Lots of funny little Shakespeare jokes. The witches are very Macbeth in their design, and even in the conceptualization. They do not explain how the witches can do magic, and the Doctor saying that's not magic, it's science. And honestly, I don't care. I'm more than happy for it to be magic. Doctor Who can do whatever it wants, in my opinion, other than make the moon an egg. That's I'm drawing the line there. But generally, Doctor Who can do whatever it wants, and it does witches, and it's fun, and Expelliarmus saves the day, and Shakespeare's great, and I enjoy it. I don't care that Gareth Roberts wrote it. It doesn't affect the quality of a piece of media who wrote the thing. It just doesn't. So, unless they're putting those ideas into the script, it doesn't affect it, in my opinion. Now, there's another controversial opinion for you, blimey. Gridlock. Good. I enjoy Gridlock as well. Series 3 honestly has a really, really good start. It's a nice, fun script, interesting location, going back to New Earth. Ardal Hannon has a guest turn. We get to meet Novice Haim. The Face of Bo gets to release his final secret. You are not alone. Great stuff. A lot of arc build-up. Martha just gets kidnapped for some reason. And it's a dive into a drug-addled dystopia on children's TV. At 7 o'clock in the evening, which is pretty big shoes for Doctor Who. And apparently this is Russell T Davies' favourite script. Honestly, I really enjoy it, but the macra are pointless. Why did you massacre my boys? I love the macra from the Macra Terror. They were this intelligent, malevolent life form that had completely conquered humanity, and in New Earth they just live at the basement basically, and they snap like this, and they cause a bit of tension, I suppose. But actually, again, this is, I mentioned this a few times in my Ninth Doctor video. For me, this is a plot that didn't require a villain. And it's another RTD plot that didn't require a villain. But he wants to have a monster in it because that's just sort of what he does. But I don't particularly love that aspect. But again, I think Tennant's brilliant in this story. One of his best performances. And the scene when he's talking about Gallifrey at the end is spot on. Daleks in Manhattan. And Evolution of the Daleks. Both bad. Both bad, I'm afraid. I kind of want to like them, but it's just a really bad knockoff Evolution, not Evil of the Daleks, isn't it? The Daleks have a plot which is distinctly un-Dalek. Right, okay, taking Dalek, and I like how they kill the Dalek Sec for having this very un-Dalek plot. But the rest of them have an even more un-Dalek idea, which is just to push Dalek DNA into, or Dalek thoughts into humans. Like, that is not racial purity. Do you think if the Nazis could have pushed Nazi ideas into Jewish brains, they would have thought that as racial purity? Because they absolutely would not, which detracts from the idea of the Daleks. There's bad accents. There is Miranda Racing being totally wasted. There are pig people. There is a kind of wasting of the cult of Scarrow, which were a genuinely brilliant idea. I don't have a lot of love for this one. It's a total skip of Series 3 for me. For me, Series 3 starts off very strong, then it totally goes to pot, and then the final run of the series is incredible. This is the beginning of the slump, which totally comes into play with the Lazarus experiment, which is absolutely abysmal. CGI team, what were you playing out when you came up with this guy? The biggest crime is not the design, although, crikey, the biggest crime is actually this design is supposed to be an evolutionary throwback. At one point, humans could have evolved into this scorpion with a person's face flapping in the wind on the front. Awful. Mark Gatiss gives it a good performance. In fact, everyone gives it a good performance, but you can't get around the fact that it's just an awfully designed villain. It looks really cool. And not the villain, the actual episode looks very well directed, and Martha's mum is incredibly annoying, but the rest of her family are actually interesting and well developed. But I just can't get past the villain. Sometimes a bad villain can be totally ignored because the plot is fun, or, you know, but if your villain looks that bad and is built on the idea that it's supposed to be an evolutionary throwback, I'm just not getting past that, I'm afraid. Just really kind of not getting past that. 42. Okay. Chris Chibnall's opening the script, and it's very running down corridors, but this time without any real tension. It's okay. I like some of the ideas. Tennant and Martha both give a good performance. It's got a decent guest cast, some interesting character drama, and some decently played political points, but something just doesn't feel right as a fun piece of Doctor Who. 42 itself is a nice name with a bit of a Douglas Adams callback in there. But despite the fact that it's an episode where there's a literal ticking clock, it doesn't feel like it has as much tension as it wants to have, because you should be feeling hyper stressed watching an episode like this, but you sort of don't. And I don't know why that is, but you kind of just don't. Can we talk about a masterpiece now, please? Human Nature, Family of Blood would be second only to Girl in the Fireplace in my book. I'm not going to differentiate between the two parts. I'm putting Human Nature above Family of Blood. That's not saying it's better. Honestly, they are both absolute masterpieces. Paul Cornell, make him Sean. Do it now. He is so good. Tennant's best performance in the role. Jessica Hines, phenomenal performance. Martha, probably her best outing as a companion. Harry Lloyd is an amazing, amazing actor, and he puts in a great, creepy, and honestly brings a real physicality to the role of Brother of Mine. Great guest cast, great setting, one of Murray Gold's best musical scores, phenomenal concept, just and perfect execution, well directed, great music, great editing, great pacing. Everything is on top form for this. Tennant's performance when he is seeing his own future and having to deal with the struggle between John Smith and being the Doctor could not be played any better. And have I mentioned the music? The music in this episode, this might be the best musical score for any episode ever. It's well, if Heaven Sent didn't exist. Genuinely incredible music. Great setting, 1913. It's so bright and vibrant and yet dark, and great character moments abound. This is Doctor Who at its best. Sublime television. Genuinely sublime. Blink, also in the absolute classic bracket. I know that that's a cliched opinion. I also don't really give a toss. I can literally, I say the lines along with them. I've seen this episode so many times that I can say all the lines along with them. Great use of time travel. Moffat just being a complete and utter genius. Sally Sparrow was great. I love Larry. I love Billy. It's a guest cast that are so far beyond memorable. You almost know them like they're main characters, which they actually are for this episode. Ten and Martha, it's a very new way to do a Doctor Light story. And the fact that after Love and Monsters, they had the goal to do another Doctor Light story and nail it is a testament to the vision that Russell Davies had for this show. I believe he originally asked Stephen Moffat to write the Dalek two-parter in Manhattan. Thank God he decided not to take that shambles of an idea and adapt his own idea, which was for these statues. The Weeping Angels are so creepy, they are so effective, and they're absolutely one of the best Doctor Who villains ever. Top-notch story. I'm enjoying just being happy about these stories again. Series 2 is a bit, but yes. Utopia. Above Age of Steel, I've really enjoyed Utopia. Derek Jacobi is brilliant. He puts in a great shift the whole way through the episode. And particularly as the master, he is so lovely and affable, and then in one turn he embodies so much menace. And the way he kills Chantho. Chantho herself is a great character. It's an interesting idea. Jack's back, and he's a great blast of fun, and he gets some great stuff that explains what's been going on with him in Torchwood in terms of his inability to die due to what happened at the end of Series 1 with the Partner in the Ways. Tennant's great, and I actually love Series 3 Tennant a lot. He's very on the edge, and you're never kind of sure what you're going to get from him. There's a lot of good stuff going on, and yeah, I really love the story. Honestly, people have always talked good things about the story, and for me, it was always just a precursor to the genuinely top-notch stuff which came in Sound of Drums. But it's also a phenomenal episode in its own right. There's just not enough of it. I just wish there was more of this. We could have had a one-part Daleks in Manhattan and then just moved on swiftly and had a two-part Utopia. A four-part finale would be great. The Sound of Drums is honestly one of the most underrated pieces of Doctor Who ever. I don't think it's quite as good as Utopia, but honestly, this gets dragged down so much. This is why it's so good that we can split the two parts in half, because Last of the Time Lords is a shambles. But Sound of Drums is so good. Big ideas, big concepts, but it's basically paranoid Britain being run by a complete lunatic. Lots of action, lots of violence, terrorism, the Doctor, Martha and Jack having to go on the run, go undercover, Martha's family getting abducted and probably tortured. John Sim, okay. Not a huge fan of his performance, but those planes are a menace. I think it's a lot of great stuff going on here. Last of the Time Lords, I was going to put in bad, but I felt bad doing it. So I'm going to put it in okay, because honestly, until the last 15 minutes cocks everything up, it's going pretty well. It actually was a pretty decent, interesting story. I enjoyed Tom Ellis. I think Freeman Agyeman holds the screen very well. And I love what was done with Lucy Saxon in terms of the domestic abuse subtext, particularly with the extended scenes where you hear just the way that Johnson talks to her. It's a very creepy and very well written piece. It's a shame that when she came back in End of Time, there was never really anything done with her character, because she's a very interesting character, and it does contain possibly my favorite Tennant era moment, one of them at least, which is when he's holding, after Lucy shoots John Sim, and he's holding him and he's going shouting in his face, just regenerate, and then he goes, no, I refuse, I guess you didn't know me so well, I win. And then This Is Gallifrey music plays, and he's cradling the body of the last other member of his species. That is all done perfectly, but the Dobby Doctor and the prayer with satellites and it brings him back to life crap. Oh, that is just hurts my head, and it ruins what could have been a fantastic thing. Honestly, Series 3 is an amazing series, but it's always dragged down in people's estimations. And for me, the reason why people always underrate Series 3 is because the finale really doesn't stick the landing. It really doesn't on this occasion. Voyage of the Damned. I'll put it above 42, but not above the Christmas Invasion. It's okay. It's popcorn. It's like a massive blockbuster. Honestly, possibly has the greatest Murray Gold score ever. I know I've said that about Human Nature, but this one is incredible. Listen to the track, Voyage of the Damned Suite, on, is it the Series 3 or the Series 4 soundtrack? I don't care. Listen to it. It's incredible. There's a lot of good stuff in this episode. Interesting guest cast. I love Clive Swift. Kylie Minogue's actually pretty decent, and I like how Rixton Slade is the one who survives. But I find the Heavenly Host to be a kind of weak villain, and it's a sort of knockoff Robots of Death, but in every way that the Robots of Death were creepy, the Heavenly Host are just not. What made the Robots of Death creepy was, yes, they had that detached manner and the way of speaking that was very, just standard robotic, which is kind of what made them creepy, and it's also what the Heavenly Host used. But the Robots of Death strangled people. And they have an intensity because of that. There's the scene where she's going, Pamela Salem's character in that episode, Robots of Death, where she's going, no, no, please, no, and it just lifts its hand and it grabs her around the throat, and it's so creepy. Whereas by contrast, the host killed by removing these frisbees from the head and throwing them, and that leads to a sequence where they're throwing these frisbees and the Doctor and his companions just whacking these things back like a massive game of rounders. And you cannot compare those two scenes. One is creepy and intense, and one is overly camp, and it takes away from all the intensity of the situation. And that's basically the real problem with this story. Also, Max Capricorn's a crap villain. But I always enjoy watching this episode, possibly just because the music is so good, but also because it does have some good stuff. And I should have mentioned Russell Tovey, Jeffrey Palmer, very good guest cast. And this is the peak of Doctor Who's popularity in the new series, because this is the most watched episode of New Who. And it's not an awful episode for it. And they got a 90-minute slot on Christmas Day, which just shows how massive this show used to be. You can't even get a slot on Christmas Day anymore. Mrs. Brown's Boys is on, for flip's sake. I hate Mrs. Brown's Boys. Partners in Crime. Just above Voyage of the Damned, I think. This is probably the weakest story of Series 4, in my opinion. And the fact that it's in OK says everything you need to know about how good Series 4 is. The comedy's good. Catherine Tate's much better, and her tenants have immediately classic, interesting, great to watch on-screen chemistry. The adipose are a little bit camp for my tastes, but it's an affable, fun, light script. I can't slag it off because they don't want you to take these villains seriously. The Bating, on the other hand, was meant to be this big, serious threat, and it looked pathetic. These things look pathetic, but they're meant to be little babies, so it doesn't really matter. The Fires of Pompeii is one of the most underrated stories going. I could push it into great, but I'll put it in good because I don't want to overload my great column, because I just don't. Such a good story. Honestly, actually, no, you know what, sod it, I'm putting it in great. I feel bad putting it in the same column as Doomsday. Peter Capaldi and his family as Caecilius are great. There's Karen Gillan's in it. The setting is brilliant. Italy is very well realised. There's Vesuvius, there's the Soothsayers, there's a very interesting plot, interesting take on the manipulation of religion as well, and possibly one of the few moments in Doctor Who that makes me genuinely nearly cry. General rule is I don't really cry at the stuff that everyone else cries at, the character-y stuff. That's the sort of, you know, Rose and Ten being separated, even Donna getting her memories wiped. I tend to get emotional at the real historical stuff, which is why the end of The Girl in the Fireplace gets me, and it's why the scene the Vesuvius' ash cloud engulfs the city and you can hear people screaming is awful, because 20,000 people are about to die, and that's real. That's not a story. Those people actually did die. But it's also a story with hope, and honestly, Catherine Tate puts in a masterclass of performance in this, possibly her best work. Such a good performance throughout this whole story from her. She is on top form, and yeah, she's just great in this story. Blimey. Planet of the Ood. Good. Yeah, that seems fair enough. I put it above Army of Ghosts. I don't really have anything negative to say about this one. Maybe it's not overly memorable, but it's a nice little fun slave revolution story where everyone celebrates all these horrible people's awful deaths, basically. The creepy sadist who works there gets gassed. The guy who owns the company gets turned into an Ood. There's a huge gunfight, and there's fire, and it's a slave revolution story, and who doesn't love one of those? And it deals with some pretty big issues of slavery and stuff like that. So yeah, I have a lot of time for Planet of the Ood. I think it's a very good story. So Untitled Stratagem is a kind of okay, but not particularly special first part, in my opinion. Martha's back, that's fun. Sultan's are back, that's fun. I like Ross. The Ratkin stuff is sort of hit and miss, but the Poison Sky is so good. and it makes up for it, and it turns the whole story into a great story. This is some of the best action in all New Who. It's proper old school Unit versus the alien, and Unit's weapons doing sod all about it. And then occasionally Unit do get a bit of luck and get to blow some people up, and you flipping celebrate like mad because yes, Unit. A lot of good stuff going on here. I like the atmospheric conversion ending. I enjoy Ten and Donna and Martha as a team. Rattigan gets his revenge moment. The Sontarans all get blown up. And the cliffhanger from Sontaran Strategium has the most obvious resolution ever, which is a bit of a detractor. Oh, he's stuck in a car. Oh, they have to wait a week to see how he gets out of this one. Smashes the windscreen. Wow, that's immense. How did we not think of that? Oh, we did, if we had a brain. Thanks. The Doctor's daughter. Okay. Also in the okay column. I'm trying to think where to put it. Probably behind Rise of the Cybermen. I don't think that the actual plot overly works. It's interesting, but it sort of needed two parts to flourish. So what saves it from being a bad story? Well, Georgia Moffat, basically. She's great as Jenny. It's a great story. There's some brilliant moments from 10. Donna's having a flipping ball, just watching Jenny constantly leave the 10th Doctor lost for words. Martha gets some interesting stuff going off on her own with the Hath. But the story sort of forgets that she's there for certain points. And it's an okay story. It's inoffensive fun. And Series 4 had that on occasion. And it was pretty good at it. The Unicorn and the Wasp. Yes, you Gareth Roberts haters. I'm doing it again. Doomsday. I'd rather watch Unicorn and the Wasp, but it's an absolute ball. Great fun. The cast are clearly having as much fun as the viewers are, if you're having fun. Everyone's having a ball. I love those like the scenes when they're all describing their alibis and doing completely different things, or when they're all, there's like the the thing that comes over the screen that, what am I talking about? The thing that comes over the screen, and then you have like flashbacks, and they are really well done. It's great fun. I love the Doctor's attack. How is Harvey Warbanger? One word. Him and Donna are possibly at their best here ever. It's a murder mystery with Agatha Christie. This is what Doctor Who can do. I kind of love how they did the stories in there. We did a murder mystery with Agatha Christie. We did a ghost story with Charles Dickens. We did witches with Shakespeare. That's a good way to do historical figures, I think. I know some people don't like it. It's contrived, but I always have really enjoyed it. And it just has fun. This story has a lot of fun. The Wasp, yeah, I don't see how that ties in with Agatha Christie particularly. And yeah, it feels like a slightly cheap villain, but I'm having too much fun to really give a toss about the problems. And it's the Vicar. Is anyone else sick of that trope in crime things now? Oh, it can't be the Vicar. He's holy, apart from the fact that in every single crime thing ever, there's a Vicar, and he's always guilty. Ah, well. It's a problem. Silence in the Library. Great. Silence in the Library is top-notch Doctor Who. The fact that this is definitely my least favourite Stephen Moffat script from before he became showrunner. Of his 4 for each of the RTD series, Silence in the Library, Forest of the Dead, which can both go in great, is my least favourite of the 4. Which says everything you need to know about how good his scripts were and why there was absolutely no other person who could possibly have been showrunner after him. No one else could have taken on that role. This is so good. Such a great plot, great guest cast, creepy, scary Vashta Narada. It's mind-boggling at points. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. Like there's this library, but it's inside a girl's head. And what's Dr. Moon got to do with it, and what's all these different ideas. It's big and it's bold and it's having a lot. It gives the audience an absolute brain meltdown trying to think about what's going on. But that's a Moffat script for you, and they're doing a lot of fun. River's return is great, and with the benefit of hindsight, her exit's even better than it was when it actually was quite effective originally. And Moffat's clearly setting up his own era here with the crash of the Byzantium and River knowing the Doctor's name. And all that kind of stuff. And I really love this one, and it gives Donna some really amazing stuff to do when she's put in the simulation world, and she loses her children, and she meets her perfect love interest, but he can't speak. And I think it's a really, really brilliant story with a lovely ending as well. Midnight is categorically, for me, the best Russell T Davies script of them all. I'll put it above Blink. This is so good. I can't even begin. For me, Russell T Davies doesn't work when he is doing too much. The End of Time is possibly the biggest example of this, where there's so much crap going on that's not properly explained. Big idea, big idea, big idea. Leave that stuff to Moffat. For me, Russell Davies' best scripts are the minimalist scripts, Children of Earth and Midnight. And what works between both Children of Earth and Midnight is that we never get our answers to the questions that we're posing. We never find out who the villains are, and things are kept a secret, and that makes them much scarier. A great guest cast with Colin Morgan, who's fantastic, and David Troughton, who's Patrick Troughton's son, and some really, really creepy turns from all of the guest cast. And all of them are very morally ambiguous. None of them remain on the side of good. Some of them, I'm not going to get involved in throwing a man out of the airlock, but it just shows how scared people are. Possibly the scariest villains Doctor Who can really give you. There's such an intensity and a genuinely unsettling tone throughout this whole story. Copying became really creepy after this. I think this is nigh on perfect. Honestly, low budget Doctor Who, but with sublime writing and acting, and it elevates this into this very creepy, very well regarded, arguably one of the greatest stories of all time. And for me, Russell Davies' best script for Doctor Who. Even better than something. Oh, actually, maybe not his best script for Doctor Who, because he's got one more. But I do think he works better when he's much more minimalist about things. Turn Left is actually an idea box from Russell T Davies, but it's an idea box that really, really works because it's just so many big, grand ideas. But it works because we've watched the last 4 years, we've watched all of these things that we see play out, and it gives this alternative timeline story. And I only picked up from after series 2, but of all these events, and then we have the Sarah Jane Adventures team going and all dying at the hospital, and Martha dying and never meeting the Doctor. We have the Torchwood team defeating the Sontarans, but we have the Titanic destroying half of London. We have a lot of big, big ideas and brilliant acting, and this depiction of a country's slow descent into fascism, basically, which is very deep for Doctor Who. And Bernard Crimmins puts in an incredible performance. That's all I can say about his performance. So good. The salute, the tears, the labour camps, that's what they called them last time, is chilling. And it's such a great piece of Doctor Who. Catherine Tate and Bernard Crimmins own the screen every time they're on. They are so good together. And it's a Dr. Light story, and it's great. Rose is actually pretty good. I kind of like her in this, which is unexpected, because honestly, I didn't enjoy her after Christopher Eccleston left. But she's pretty good here, maybe a little bit overly secretive. But showing her being so lovely to Donna is such a contrast to the way that she treated Sarah Jane, or literally any other woman who had the slightest interest in the Doctor throughout the entirety of series 2. It's just a great story, and it deserves all the love and praise that it gets. I'm just gushing about series 4 at this point. I don't care. Stolen Earth is an absolute classic. It's the better of the two parts, and maybe some of the love that I'm giving the story is just the sheer fanboy at seeing the Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood and Doctor Who all collide, and Shadow Proclamation and Jadoon and Daleks and Davros and Genesis of the Daleks throwbacks and all these great, amazing things coming out and being placed on screen. Honestly, if the Brigadier was in this, it might just get pushed into first. It's not a perfect piece of television like some of these other ones I've been talking about at the top, but the sheer fan service element is enough to elevate it. And Davros is so good. Julian Bleach is so good. The Daleks are possibly, I was about to say possibly at their best. They're not quite as good as they were with Christopher Eccleston, but this is easily the best Dalek outing from the Tennant era. They weren't particularly effective in Doomsday. They weren't even remotely effective in Evolution of the Daleks, but they were really scary here. They take over the Earth like that. The scene when they hear the Exterminate being played down the line and you see Sarah Jane's face, you see Jack's face, that is pure terror, and I love that they depict it that way. I think it's such a good first part. Brilliant ideas. And a second part, which is good, but not quite as good as the first part. I'll put it just there behind Smith and Jones. A second part that's not quite up to the standards and has some things that just happen for sort of no reason. I don't like Rose's new exit, but I love Donna's exit. I think it's such a great conclusion for her story, and having all of that character work just ripped from us is devastating on a huge monumental scale. But I kind of don't like the Dr. Donna stuff because it does kind of just feel like a little bit of an anticlimax to the story. But because I'm having so much fun with all my favorite characters and all these great stuff going on, it can compensate and paper over the cracks for stuff that I'm not as much of a fan of. The next Doctor, bad. Yeah, series 4 was going so flipping well, guys, and then the Christmas special just totally derailed. David Morrissey's fun, Rosita's fun, David Tennant's fun. Derva Kerwin is not fun and totally wasted. And the Cybermen have long outstayed their welcome. The Cybermen, they're in total need of a redesign. They get thrown back to the past where for some reason they decide not to convert any humans, just a couple of dogs. And their big plan is to create a massive Cyber King. I don't think Russell Davies needs to keep outdoing himself. When I arrive in a Victorian setting, I want a quirky little Victorian Doctor Who story. I do not want it to go massive in huge epic scale. And they had a potential to create a villain in Derva Kerwin's Matron, who would have been a very fascinating take on someone who sided with the Cybermen because she worked in the workhouses. How interesting would it have been if the reason she wanted to turn everyone into Cybermen was because, you know, she's seen the effect of poverty and she wanted to make everyone truly equal. If that idea had corrupted her, that would have been such an interesting way to frame a Cyberman story. In reality, she's just a bit hacked off of sexism and as a result has decided to commit genocide on her own species, which is a very weak motivation for committing an awful atrocity. And yeah, that's the biggest attract. The Cyber King looks pathetic and stupid, but there's beautiful moments that keep this out of terrible. I love the ending and I enjoy enough stuff that I'm not going to tell you that this is an absolutely awful piece of Doctor Who, but it's definitely not good. Planet of the Dead, where am I putting this? Where am I putting you? Okay, probably, but I don't know exactly where and okay. Yeah, just above Last of the Time Lords. Gareth Roberts, so people are going to be okay that I'm slagging this one a bit because it's just a bit dull. I like Michelle Ryan as Lady Christina, sort of wish we could have kept her. I think she's good fun, if a little bit obnoxious. The guest cast are okay, of slightly wasted. The planet is, everything's just middling in this story, middling in the extreme. I like Malcolm though. He's a nice little addition. And a nice little addition to this list that I wasn't expecting to be given was the wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, which means I get to talk about a Sarah Jane Adventures episode with the Trickster in it, which is really fun because I kind of love the Trickster. I'll put it above Screw-Union. It's the least favorite, my least favorite of the Trickster stories, but that's not really saying much because they're all masterpieces. It's just such a good story. Did Gareth Roberts write this? Am I going to get hate for this because Gareth Roberts wrote it? And I'm saying it's a masterpiece. It's so flipping good. I love that Sarah Jane Adventures team of Sarah, Clyde, Luke, and Rani. Clyde and Rani are two of the greatest characters in the universe. They should 100% come back as companions. So well developed. It gives Sarah Jane a really emotional plot. Nigel Havers gives a great guest appearance. The Trickster is brilliant. Tennant comes in and is pretty good and has a really lovely final scene with Sarah Jane, which I believe is actually David Tennant's last scene that he filmed for as the Doctor whatsoever. And it's a really good story, and it's a fantastic Sarah Jane. As far as the Sarah Jane Adventures crossovers with Doctor Who, this is the lesser of the two. But I'll talk about Death of the Doctor when I do the Matt Smith list. And honestly, that could be an absolute classic, because anyone who tells you that Sarah Jane Adventures is a kids' show is right. But it's also so good. And you should 100%, if you've been avoiding it because you think, oh, it's just a kids' show, I'm not gonna go. Correct yourself. Go and watch it now. It's incredible. Series one's a bit naff though. Waters of Mars, speaking of incredible, I don't know if I should put this above Midnight or below. I'll put it above. This will be Russell Davies' best script then, because this is so good. This feels like where the entire of the Russell T Davies era has been going, and the entirety of the Tennant era. His vanity took us here, and Russell T Davies' depiction of the Time Lords and him as the last Time Lord took us here. This feels like where everything has been going, and slightly unpopular opinion, this should have been his final episode. This should have been Tennant's end, but they were never going to be brave enough to allow this Doctor to die in shame, because he is the villain in this story. He really is. And Adelaide, honestly, every single great moment in the Tennant specials comes from this. Him telling Adelaide her family's future as a consolation. Yeah, that's the right word. No, it's not. You know what I mean. Consolation, yeah. Him telling Adelaide her future. Adelaide is great, played by Lindsay Duncan. Brilliant guest cast, a lot of whom have gone on to do a lot of good things in their TV career, and I spot them all the time on TV. The Mars base doesn't look all too good. The funny robot is sort of funny, but kind of there. But honestly, the Flood are good. But the Doctor is the villain of this piece. The Time Lord, victorious. The laws of time are mine, and they will obey me. He is frightening. He is off-putting. He is scary. And this is David Tennant's, I know I've already said this, haven't I? This is David Tennant's best performance in this role. He is so flipping good in this. This is an incredible piece of television. And it should have been the end, because yikes. The End of Time Part 1 is bad. Outright bad. Too many ideas that they have not got enough time to deal with, too many big concepts and big things, and the Master becomes a religious cult figure in one of about a million things that have no background but just sort of happen. We meet Lucy Saxon again, and that's sort of just there. There's a lot of stuff in this that I'm not a huge fan of. I don't mind the cliffhanger, but a lot of the stuff in the Master in this episode is too camp to keep my attention. The turning into a skeleton, the I am so hungry, the eating the chicken, all the weird stuff. And I kind of don't like Tennant in this, which considering he could have gone out on his highest high of Waters of Mars. The fact that he has this big speech where he's sort of crying to wealth, and he says, even if I change, I feel like dying. Everything I am dies, and a new man goes sauntering away, and I'm dead. Is the worst possible depiction of regeneration, and it really, really annoys me. And honestly, the whole of Part 1 is just not good. The second part is good, but it's nothing particularly special by this era's standards. The plot is at least fun. A lot of the stuff actually feels much better. As much as I said that the Russell T Davies era coming to a halt felt like it was coming to its natural conclusion in Waters of Mars, the End of Time Part 1 really steps things up at the very end of the story when the Time Lords are revealed. The Time Lord stuff is all great in Part 2. I think Johnson puts in a decent performance. What's keeping this out of great is very simple. Tennant's meltdown about having to save Wilf. That it's not fair speech is the worst thing in the Russell T Davies era. In the very last episode of the Russell T Davies era. It's awful. but I kind of really love, it's so overindulgent and vanity and all these things. And yet the overindulgence is what I love about those final 15 minutes. This era had earned the victory lap that it got. 100% had earned that victory lap. Seeing all the companions again, seeing all the, seeing lots of the little villains that we've met across the world. It feels like the end of an era. It feels like the end of an era should feel like. But I still don't love it as much as I feel like I kind of wish I did. And I used to love it more, but every time I watch it, more stuff just niggles and eats away at me. And that's sort of disappointing. But honestly, Tennant isn't up there with my favourites, but I do love him, particularly in series 3 and 4. And just looking at that list reminds me how many great stories he really did have. Yes, he may have more terrible than any other Doctor I've done so far, with 4, which I know is not a lot, but I'm not particularly an overly negative person, which you may be disagreeing with, haven't seen me talk about some of these stories, but so much of this era is fun, running around corridors. I do love this. I do love this era. It's not my favourite era, but I always have a soft spot for it in my heart. Ten and Donna, particularly, are a great TARDIS team, and I enjoyed David Tennant's performance a lot in this role. That was a mammoth video. We're like topping an hour right now. Matt Smith's one will also be long, and I will see you again for Matt Smith when my voice is recovered from all this talking. See ya.